Ahoy again, Captain Donna, the smooth seas of Hearthstone. The hat's still doing it, so we're gonna keep going with it. This is the next video in my series on the Naxxramas neutral cards and how they synergize with the classes. I have First Mate Mortimer here on the desk. He may be in the video at intermittent times. You never know what's gonna happen. Today's card will be, let's do the egg today. The Nerubian egg, 2-drop, 0/2, but the death rattle is summon a 4/4 Nerubian. Pretty popular card, seen this card a lot, maybe the most popular card of the cards that came out of the Arachnid Quarter. In general, the card has 2 strengths. I mean, the death rattle is huge, right? And that affects kind of how your opponent goes about the board. They usually don't want to kill this card because they don't want to deal with the 4/4, certainly not early in the game. Hey, buddy. Okay. And the other thing is that it's a good insurance against accidentally killing it in like a board sweep, like Explosive Trap, Consecrate, Lightning Storm. You know, these cards are real problems for Zoo and any type of aggro deck, but if you have the egg out there with the O2, you know, you get something, you get something big back after, after a sweep happens. And since the sweep happens on your opponent's turn, when it comes back to your turn, you're going to have a minion with charge, essentially, which is pretty good. So I think the card seems to be pretty strong in aggro, but it has this downside in that it doesn't actually do any damage, right? That's the other side of the card that you have to think about, is that it can become really powerful. You can get a lot of value out of the card when you can throw a buff on it. You can make it trade into another creature in its 0/2 form, die, and then you get the 4/4 out of it as well. So those are kind of the key combos that this card revolves around. So let's go through the classes. Let's talk about Druid. Oh, let me bring it up here so we can have it. Okay, there. Now we'll remember what it is. With Druid, Druid relies a lot on certainly token Druid, but all Druids in some regard rely on having cards that stick, that stay out there, that they can do stuff with at a future turn. And the big reason for that is Savage Roar. Nearly every Druid deck has this in it because of your Savage Roar, Force of Nature combos, right? And Savage Roar, this is a card that just improves so much when you have more minions on the board, and that's why people typically want to eliminate everything that a Druid has, which is hard to do because they have pretty beefy minions, because Savage Roar increases so much if you have any kind of board at all. Many times Savage Roar and Force of Nature just kills you when you don't even have a board. So the card already is strong because opponents are typically going to ignore it. And even if they silence it, it's still a body that's out there. If they silence it, then they're like almost definitely going to ignore it. In that vein, your Mark of the Wild, your Power of the Wild combos, especially with Violet Teacher, those are going to be good on this card in general. These are excellent. I mean, if you can pull this off, if you're looking at coining out the egg and turn 2 Mark of the Wild, you got a 2/4 taunt that spawns a 4/4. Pretty beefy. Mark of Nature, same thing. All of a sudden that 4 attack looks pretty good to put on it. Even the taunt looks pretty good. But that card's pretty good with it as well. Cenarius is his little buff, the 2/2. I don't know, super late game, right? But maybe there's some value that's there as well. The key is that because the card stays out there and has a great death rep, it's going to be good with the Druid style of cards and their buffs. Even in the Druid decks that have kind of Poison Seeds and Soul of the Forest, people that are experimenting with this Poison Seeds card, it goes great with Poison Seeds, right? Because Poison Seed, it destroys all minions. It doesn't polymorph them. It kills everything, triggers all the death rattles, and then it replaces them with the 2/2s. So if this takes a Poison Seed, the 0/2 dies, you get a 2/2, and then you also get a 4/4. You're getting 6 stats out of a 2-drop combo. Additionally, another kind of realistic synergy is that when you bring it out on turn 2, a lot of times your opponent just leaves it out there, and so you're going to be getting into your mid-game turns where you're going to do something with Poison Seeds, with Soul of the Forest. There can be some real good value there. So a lot of cards in the Druid set line up. I mean, you could naturalize it, right? Naturalize can target any minion, but I don't know. You'd be in pretty desperate, pretty desperate attempt there. You could hit with savagery. There's a couple other kind of not as good plays or less intuitive, but you know the buff cards are great. Everything with a token, everything with a sticky token is going to be good for Druid, and that's exactly what it is. Take a look at Hunter. It's not a beast, right? So already your synergy with Hunter is going to be diminished a lot. You could spend a card and arcane shot it to bring out the 4/4. That's it's tough for me to think where that would be valuable to do, but maybe there's some crazy situation that could happen. All of Hunter's cards synergize with beasts, right? There's not really a lot here. You know, Leok gives all of your minions +1 attack, so on your animal companion drop, if you get Leok, then okay, now you have a 1/2, and that's something. It can at least move and go attack something. But everything else is beasts. There's not a lot there. I think maybe the best card in Hunter that it synergizes with is Misdirect, because you know it's a speed bump that Misdirect can pick up, right? If they attack your face and it's the only other minion out, you have a 50% chance that it's going to hit that thing and spawn the 4/4. Granted, they still have a minion left, but again, because that happens on their turn, it'll probably be if it's the only minion out there, then you're essentially getting a charge minion. So Misdirect is not too bad. You're just going to be the star of this video, aren't you? Okay. With Mage, you know, Mage doesn't really have any buff cards, right? They don't have any cards that give a minion attack or enable it to really do anything special. All their cards are based on synergizing with their spells. Mana Worm with the early removal, and Mirror Image, Sorcerer's Apprentice with all your kill condition stuff, and Kirin Mage with the secrets. Water Elemental with really annoying your opponent. Really annoying Mortimer, apparently. Oh, you're a tough first mate. So, with Mage, you know, I don't see it being really useful in Mage. The styles of Mage that play, you know, your aggro Mage is going to very aggressively get board control and keep it in the beginning, because Buffy, Mana Worm, their hero power in general is sort of designed for that. Putting out a 0/2, not very good, you know. It would be rare that you would have 2 turns of nothing to do with their hero power except shoot your own egg, right? No big deal. If Arcane Explosion hit all minions, maybe, then there would be something there. But yeah, I don't really see much. It doesn't interact with any of Mage's cards. You're certainly not going to polymorph it. So pretty neutral synergy with Mage. Paladin, on the other hand, has quite a bit. Blessing Might is maybe the most obvious card, because you can do it in the early game. You turn it into a 3/2. It's going to kill whatever on turn 2 or turn 3, and then you're going to get a 4/4 out of it. Great value out of Blessing of Might. Great investment. You know, you're spending 1 card. You're spending 2. You're spending 1 card to remove one of their cards, and you get a board dominant minion on the back half of it. Blessing of Wisdom, it has 0 attack, so you have to give it attack power. You know, putting Divine Shield on it is pretty limited until you can get some kind of power on it, but Sword of Justice, it's a monster. That's a monster card with it. You know, it's coming out as a 1/3. Now it can attack. When the Death Rattle is going to bring out a 5/5, that's pretty big, you know, especially early game. 5/5 is big. It's got a little bit of immunity to equality, right? You don't really care that it drops to 1 health. You kind of want the card to die anyway, so it's not a huge thing there. And Blessing of Kings, same deal, right? You can turn it into 4/6 that spawns a 4/4 in the back end. I mean, that's as good as Karn Bloodhoof, right? A friggin' legendary for a 6-drop, and this is just a little less good for the same amount of mana. A card that it really goes well with that isn't pictured here is Avenge, the new Paladin secret, right? Which is a 1-drop secret like Paladin. I should have had a picture to put up here, but it's a you know, just like all the Paladin secrets, it's a 1-drop, and when a minion dies, a random friendly minion gets 3/2. You could have a real situation where you bring the egg out on turn 2, and then you flip your little 1/1 token out, you throw Avenge up. I mean, they attack, they kill your 1/1 token because they're not going to attack and kill the egg, right? All of a sudden, your egg's now a 4/3. Is that right? +3/+2. So it's a 3/4, excuse me. Your egg's a 3/4. That spawns a 4/4. Unlike turn 3, crazy good. That's really strong synergy with Avenge. Paladin, pretty good with this card because of Blessing of Might. That's maybe the most critical of the cards because you want it to happen in the early game, but I mean, what a combo, right? Great combo with Blessing of Might, great synergy with Sword of Justice, great synergy with Avenge. Still some other stuff that it even syncs up with further. I think it's an excellent card for Paladin, especially in your aggro type, your aggro type matchup. Your long game Paladins, not as much. The card in general, I don't think is that good in control-oriented matchups. It's just essentially insurance against a board sweep because you're going to get swept eventually, but you usually have other way to wins than relying on a random 4/4 minion to show up, right? So aggro, very good though, and the class set matches it well. Priest isn't too great, I don't think. The first play that comes to my mind is the Inner Fire play to turn it into, you think of this as a Rockbiter weapon, right? Rockbiter adds 3 attack. Well, this adds 2 attack, okay? And you throw it into something that is going to die. From a realistic standpoint, most priests that run decks based on Divine Spirit and Inner Fire combos, they're usually saving those cards for something very specific, right? Usually they're win condition like Valen or one of the big dragons or a Stranglethorn Tiger or something like that they know they can get a lot of mileage out of. It would be tough for me to think that they would invest it into the egg. Maybe in Zoo if they have like a super bad hand, that would be the only thing that I would really think of. Power World Shield's kind of the same thing. Yeah, turning it into 0/4 is sort of a waste to draw a card. Maybe if you Inner Fired it after that, but you're going to be saving this card for a Northshire Cleric or for the Wild Pyromancer. Shadow Word Pain, same thing. There's some theoretical synergy that's there in that you can target it with Shadow Word Pain and spawn yourself a 4/4. You think of this as a 4/4 spawn, but you're usually going to save that card for something else. Shadow Word Pain's an awesome aggro card, or an awesome anti-aggro card, and decent mid-range card with the amount of Tazdingos that there are. But yeah, that's why I don't think you're going to be using it on the egg. I think the card that it combos maybe the best in Priest with is the Auchenai Soul Priest. None of the other cards really do much with it. But the Soul Priest... hey, buddy. Hey, let's sit down here. The Soul Priest is... What are you going to fight that? Okay. We'll put this on the ground. The Soul Priest is... if it's out there, right? You got the O2 egg out there. Your opponent figures, well, Priest can't really buff anything, so we'll just leave it alone. And then all of a sudden, it's turn 4. Soul Priest comes out, Circle of Healing, sweeps the board. Now you're looking at your 3/1, which you already like, and but you got your 4/4 now there too. Soul Priest combos can be pretty big. If it's out there when you do a Soul Priest kind of reverse Nova, now that actually has some benefit. Maybe you'd want to do it because it's going to spawn a 4/4. Shadow Form, there's some synergy there. There definitely could be times where it's more valuable to kill your own egg and spawn your 4/4 than it would be to, like, I don't know, do 2 damage to your opponent's face. Mortimer, this tail is okay. We'll see it. Mortimer really likes the Priest class, I guess. So, Shadow Form Priests, I could see some use there, and your Auchenai, everything else is pretty limited. Okay, Rogue's got some good stuff. You got Backstab, and that's the big one, and that's maybe the most obvious combo with this card in the entire game, right? Is the coin, the egg, and Backstab at turn 1 4/4. I mean, that's Millhouse Mana Storm with no drawback, right? The drawback is you gave up one of your good removal cards. Cold Blood, same thing. You know, it's a great target for Cold Blood because you want it to die. Rogue uses Cold Blood in a way where they put it on minions that either kill your opponent, or in a tempo rogue, they're going to put it on to do damage to your face, and now there's so much power on the minion you can't ignore it, or there's like a big taunt that it needs to trade into or something like that. You know, that's the classic Argent Squire Cold Blood to knock down a Yeti or knock down a Sen'jin Shieldmaster. You know, this card can work with that too, because you can't really ignore a 4/2 minion, especially in the early game. And when it dies, you get a 4/4. I mean, the Death Rattle makes it great. It's a better target for Cold Blood than, you know, say the Haunted Creeper is, right? Because then you're just getting these little crappy guys afterwards. But this is like a killer Death Rattle, so I think Cold Blood becomes attractive. Backstab's good because the early play is really strong, and, you know, much later it kind of gives you control over when it is that you want to spawn the thing if there's not a lot going on your opponent's side of the board. If you're playing Miracle, right, there are definitely times when you backstab your own creatures because you're going for that card draw. A lot of people, when they play against Miracle, they just don't put out hardly any minions because they don't want them to get backstabbed. They don't want them to get sapped because then you can draw more off that. Huge value if it was in Miracle, if instead of backstabbing your Auctioneer to a 4/2 and concealing him, if you backstab your O2 egg, spawn a 4/4, and then conceal them both. Pretty big. Yeah, that said, I don't think it's going to show up in Miracle Rogue, but that's there, right? You see that sometimes. Other than those two cards, you know, there's some... You have some combo stuff that can trigger it. You know, your SI agent, you could do it. It would be tough for me to think of a situation where it would be worthwhile for you to use that combo on the egg, but it's an option. Perdition's Blade is the same thing. I could see that. I could see Perdition's Blade. You can think of a situation where you have... Let's say you bring the egg out, right? And then you coin out Perdition, or you combo, I guess it would be turn 3 anyway, right? You combo out Perdition's Blade anyway. You use the Battle Cry to shoot your own egg, and then you kill like a 3/2 minion that they have out. Now you have a 4/4 and a weapon, probably on an empty board. Yeah, pretty good, right? There's some good... I think there's some decent versatility that's there, at least enough to consider. Kidnapper Sprint at the top of the mana curve, they don't really do anything with that. So, Rogue's good. I think it's good here. Backstab's big. Cold Blood's big. The only thing that takes away is that, you know, usually you're not using those cards on those things. You're usually using Cold Blood on Leroy or South Sea Deckhands to kill your opponent, because that card's really important for win condition and for burst, and you're usually using Backstab to control your opponent's board versus yourself. So the synergies are good, but I think realistically Rogue's gonna suffer a little bit because these cards you usually want to save for something else. Versus, you know, Blessing of Might, or, you know, as we're gonna see, Rockbiter Weapon. Those are cards that you absolutely use on low level minions to trade them up. Let's talk about Shaman. Shaman is similar to Paladin in how it controls the board. You put out a ton of minions, and you want stuff that can survive. You want things that stick. You turn non-threatening things like your O2 totems into very threatening things. You do that with Rockbiter Weapon and then Wind Fury. You do that with Flame Tongue Totem. You do that with Bloodlust. You know, that's what makes things, just bodies in general, threatening, and all of a sudden your O2 Healing Tides can become very potent things. This card is just another totem. It's another O2, but it's one your opponent is probably not going to kill because it does not want to spawn the 4/4, and that is really big for you because you have a lot of control over when it is that you want the thing to die. You know, you can throw a taunt on it with Ancestral Healing. You know, it's an O2 taunt, so it's not going to trade for anything, but it's a good way to force your opponent to spawn the 4/4 I don't know if it's a good way. It's a way. You know, we're just talking about synergy, what works together, and that's something that could work together. I don't think you would put an ancestral spirit on it. You know, rock biter's the obvious play. I think, you know, 3/2, trade it into something. You know, you trade it into that 3/3 on the next turn. You know, pretty big, and then you get the 4/4 out of it. Anytime that's part of the egg dream, right? Is you buff it with the attack, you send it into another minion, and you get a huge minion on the other side. Flame Tongue is probably the best synergy card in the Shaman set. Very powerful, I think, because you drop the Flame Tongue right there, and, you know, boom, now it's in 2 damage. Or you get your Flame Tongue, you know, line of totems. You just go down the line when you're taking down like the ogre or something like that. You go boom, boom, boom. Or I guess boom, boom, boom. You just send them in as they come down. The egg's one more thing, but instead of a dead totem, you get a 4/4 thing. That's there. So real strong there. Bloodlust, same deal. You know, the threat of Bloodlust is just them having minions, and so it's another 3 damage on your Bloodlust if you get it. So good stuff in Shaman. In the early game type of Shaman, how Shamans control the early game, I think it synergizes well with that. Shaman's going to try to do what they can to protect their board as much as possible with their shocks, with Fork, with Lightning Bolt, with the Axe. Those are all their, hey, I got to stall this game until I get to mid-range where I have my big guns. And it's just one more thing that's there, because now all of a sudden, you know, instead of Rock Biter and a dead creature, you have Rock Biter and a board presence. Something like that. So it fits really in good with how Shaman typically conducts themselves in an early game when they're focusing on their own class cards. Warlock is where it's the most popular in Zoo, and I think that's pretty deserved. There are several things you can do in Zoo, like you can Soulfire it. I mean, you'd never do that, but it's a possibility. I don't know. I can't ever imagine a situation where you would Soulfire. Why wouldn't you just Soulfire their face, right? But it can target it, so there's very, very limited synergy there. Mortal Coil's an interesting card. You know, maybe it takes 1 damage somehow from a Whirlwind, or, you know, maybe you're playing with Dread Infernals for some reason. They do 1 damage to everything, and then you go, okay, well, that's cool. I'm going to toss a Mortal Coil on it. I do get a card, and I spawn my 4/4. So there's some use there with Mortal Coil, I think, there. You know, you want to use Mortal Coil on your opponent's minions, but it doesn't always become the case. I mean, everybody's had a game where Mortal Coil is a dead card. So it's just one more thing that can possibly do. Power Overwhelming is the big, one of the big plays in Warlock. It's a great target for Power Overwhelming because you want it to die. You want to spawn the 4/4. Power Overwhelming buffs it enough that it's going to kill whatever you're trying to trade it into. It can come out early game. It can come out late game. You know, and it's going to be like Druid and like Paladin and like Shaman. Power Overwhelming is a card that benefits from minions that stick and that survive. So you have more options as the game progresses about when it is that you want to put Power Overwhelming on something. Is it going to be my win condition, or do I really need to take down that, you know, Azure Drake, or all the type of things? That's good play because it dies anyway. Even better. You know, Demon Fire does 2 damage to anything. Drain Life does 2 damage to anything. Those are both, like, I guess Shadow Bolt does too. I thought that was just enemies. Those all can do it, but typically, you know, like Backstab, typically you're gonna really want to use those on enemy minions, and you know, your own minion, a little less exciting. Drain Life maybe is the only one I would think could be a good deal, but it's not a super popular card, and you're still going to want to try to use it on your enemies, you know. Hellfire it syncs up with pretty well, because if it's, you know, it's out there, and if you get in a situation where you need to Hellfire, you get a nice benefit. You know, typically you're going to Hellfire when you're going to be sweeping everything on the board. You're going to kill everything on the board. And so now you've Hellfired, and you have a good minion for board presence to start rebuilding your board. Good synergy with Hellfire. Oh, I passed right over, Void Terror. I think this is the best card that it synergizes with, and I think this egg is the reason that you're starting to see Void Terror again because of that combo. Because you're talking turn 2 egg, turn 3 Void Terror, eat the egg, 3/5 4/4, turn 3 dominant, right? I mean, dominant board position at that point. Void Terror that gets laughed at because it's such a huge silence target, or if something happens and it gets killed, you lose all this creature investment. But because the egg is a little unique and it's a card that you absolutely want to trigger the death rattle on, Void Terror kind of comes up big. I mean, even if they silence it, it's still going to be a 3/3 and a 4/4. Pretty good. I think that combo and the power overwhelming target for it are both the really strong Warlock things. Shadow Flame's not going to do much because it only has 0 attack. I can't think you would ever siphon it, even though technically you could. Maybe if you really, really need that 3 life and you don't have any minions on the board, like if you're at 12 health versus a druid on a totally empty board, it's the only thing out there. And that they have the combo in their hand. Yeah, it's pretty minute. The Dread Infernal, 1 damage to everything. Not a real popular Warlock card, but at least not right now. But, that's cool. Damaging your stuff brings it down to 1, like we talked about. Maybe there's a Moral Coil combo, something like that's in there. Twisting Nether, it's like super Hellfire, right? It's going to survive. That's cool. It's still out there. So it's a good death rattle card, like all things, in that whenever you have a full board clear on both sides, then it gives you that insurance that you're going to have something that's out there. So, a couple big plays for Warlock. Is it the greatest card for Warlock? Not really. In Handlock, it's not a card that, well, I don't know. I mean, it's a 4/4 that's a decent amount of early game pressure, but it's good in Handlock if you're anti-aggro, right? If you're going to be looking at a turn 4 or 5 Hellfire, then it's good to have that to put pressure on when they're trying to rebuild the board. So actually, that's not too bad in Handlock, I guess. In Zoo, it's really popular. Is it really that good in Zoo? I think that's going to remain to be seen. It's really slow. It's a 0/2, right? But the back end of it is really good because Zoo has a lot of cards that buff, and they're really vulnerable to board sweeps, and this makes them significantly less vulnerable. So, currently it's very popular in Zoo. I think it'll continue to be good in Zoo as things go ahead. I think the tempo loss that you have on it is probably worth the Death Rattle minion. We come to Warrior, and Warrior has a couple things that enable it to trade up, right? Inner Rage makes the 2/1. Cruel Taskmaster does the same thing against an early aggro deck. That's really good. You coin the egg out. Next turn you drop the Taskmaster. It's a 2/1. You trade it into their 3/2, and now you have your 4/4 and a 2/2. Pretty good shape. It can Whirlwind, it can take a tick of that, so it can take a tick of Whirlwind and survive. Whenever you have a card like that is a card you're not really doing with, it can be decent comboing with Armorsmith. It can be decent comboing to pump the Frothing Berserker up. Just being able to get more value out of Whirlwind is pretty good. It'd be tough for this to trivial because of the 2 health, right? Unlike the Web Lord, right? The 1/4. Those are really good cards for Battle Rage, for Rampage, because they can take damage and survive. This 2 health, if it's taking damage, it's probably going to die. Commanding Shout doesn't do much because it doesn't have any attack. Although it does charge with the Warsong Commander, it doesn't have any attack either. So, those cards don't do much. Though charge itself is good on it. It's a little expensive, but it's a 2/2. You could drop that. I mean, it's a 5 drop, right? But if the board was right, you could drop the egg, put charge on it. You run the 2/2 into, I don't know, something that has 2 health for some reason. Maybe a Argent Commander that you got the shield off of somehow. And then, you know, a 4/4 on the 5 drop. Not terrible. I mean, that's what a Drake is, right? It's not terrible. It's not good, but yeah, maybe charge. There's something you can do there. Oh, you can slam it, worst case scenario. You can get into situations where slam becomes a dead card, especially in more mid-range, more control type decks. You don't really have much to do with slam, except you're going to try to slam an Acolyte to draw off it, or slam Garrosh to enrage him. You know, maybe it would be worthwhile to spawn it. It's an option, right? And then, like the Warlock cards, you know, you have Brawl. Your double-sided board sweeps can be decent because you're going to get a good minion afterwards. You're guaranteed to have a 4/4 after the Brawl. It's almost actually worse if your egg survives the Brawl, which is kind of funny to think about an egg winning that. But, you know, you're going to have the 4/4, and if, you know, your other minion was the one that survived the Brawl, then even better. And you know, if their minion survived the Brawl, a 4/4 can at least do something to it, right? So nothing like exciting in Warrior, nothing crazy, like really solid play, but there's enough stuff that it's okay. To sum it up, some of the classes do really good with it. You know, Druid I think is really strong with it. Paladin's really strong. Shaman's really strong. Warlock's really strong. They have good combos. They have several things that they can do where they can get a lot of value out of the card by buffing it, trading into something, getting the death rattle back. And especially Paladin, Shaman, Druid, it really fits with kind of their style of play because they're usually going in a lower, slower tempo and then try to maximize the cards that they do have to survive. You know, that's going to be the top tier. You know, number 2 is probably your Rogue, your Warrior. Those cards don't, you know, there's not a whole lot that's, and I'll throw in the Priest just for the shadow form, the Auchenai type things. You know, maybe you have a couple combos in there. None of them are really that great. It would be tough for this card to really make the list, I think, in there because the class cards don't support it that much. Maybe there's just a couple things. It's kind of dead in Hunter. It's I think definitely dead in Mage. There's just no real synergy between the cards. You know, Hunter has Misdirect. That's it. Mage has pretty much nothing. You know, those 2 cards I don't really see it being put in any type of deck. And I've seen it in Hunters, which is why it's strange to me because it doesn't really seem to combo that well. Will the card remain as popular going forward in Naxxramas? We'll just have to. We're just gonna have to see. It'll be interesting to see how this one in particular evolves because it's a little unique in the stats that it has and how strong the death rattle is in the early game, but the tempo price that's there. So we'll have to see where it goes. We'll do another video about the next card real soon. Have smooth sailing.